we are back for another episode of AI Tool Report Live. Today's session I am incredibly excited for because today's guest is Richard White. He is the founder and CEO over at Fathom, which is the #1 rated AI Notetaker. From what I understand, you just recently raised 17 million in a Series A around 2 months ago in the middle of September. And from what I can see, you've got a background in computer science, a long history of entrepreneurship, and a pretty unique approach to finding opportunities as well, which I can see from your kind of LinkedIn history and how you like to comment on that. So I really want to dive into all of these things today. So Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, Liam, thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I mean, as I said, I want to dive into everything Fathom AI today, but before that, I'd love to get some kind of context on your history as an entrepreneur. So one of the first things that it made me smell, it gave me a giggle when I was looking at it. I looked at your LinkedIn background. I could see you've been an entrepreneur from at least your teenage years. And I was wondering if you could give me some more context on this. So I was looking at the Collective Care project, which you described as a crappy piece of software that taught me more than all of my college CS classes combined. Smiley face.
Yeah, it's a pretty deep cut. I don't think anyone's asking about this. This was like the software I made in college for. It was actually to automate this is really, really niche audience, right? It was software to basically digitize and automate. If you go to like a hospital, hospitals often have like these, or they used to have these like in-house TV channels. So like, how to care for your newborn or how to deal with your diabetes diagnosis or something like that. And back in the day, this is going to date me, the way all those things ran is there was a giant bank of VHS tapes in the back, think like 50 VHS recorder things playing, and they just had them play and, automatically rewind and play again sort of thing. And so, yeah, in high school, I was like, oh, well, we'll just build a digital version of that. That should be easy. And that, it was a terrible, as you read off my LinkedIn, and in retrospect, it was a terrible piece of software. No one should have bought it. I think one hospital actually ended up using it, but I didn't know what I was doing. But that was actually, again, super enlightening. And I think relative to my CS courses I took in college, I learned quite a bit from just, trying and screwing it up.
Did that kind of spark like a scrappiness in you? Because I mean, one of the next one I see is you're talking about a job at Kiko.com with Justin Can and Emmett Shear. And it was you sending an email to them saying a single cold email to Justin Can and Emmett Shear telling them how technically impressive but poorly designed their newly launched web-based calendar app, which led to me becoming the first full-time employee to fix it.
I mean, yeah, maybe. I don't know, or I just have don't care what people think. I guess maybe to a certain degree, like a little, maybe not know the social graces of what to do and not do. But yeah, it's pretty fortunate those guys actually answered that email. Obviously, they went on to, I feel like that's the answer to a trivia question because those two guys went on to found Twitch, which everyone's familiar with. But yeah, I worked with them on this product, the product before they built Twitch. And it all happened because they answered my email where I was basically told them their baby was ugly for 2 paragraphs. And then afterwards I was like, but I'll help you fix it. Right. Sort of thing. Yeah. And so they were very honestly open-minded and gracious to be like, I don't know. I think a lot of folks are just like, cool, thanks, delete. Right. But they're like, yeah, show us what you can do. I think they felt challenged maybe a little bit. And they're like, all right, tough guy, you design it and see if you can do a better job. And thankfully, I think I was able to do a better job. So it was great.
Yeah, it's funny because there's parallels in that story. I had a guest on a couple of weeks now, Grant Hushek, who was the first employee at Hampton Founders. And he had something along the similar lines where he's like, this is shit, this could be better. This is terrible, and it led to the same thing. When you started with them, what age were you, if you don't mind me asking?
Gosh, I think I was like 25, maybe 24.
25.
Yeah.
What did you learn from that experience? What were the biggest takeaways from working with people like that?
I mean, that was, honestly, the biggest kind of sliding doors transformational moment in my career. I grew up in East Coast in North Carolina here in the States, and not really a hotbed for entrepreneurship, at least 25 years ago, 20 years ago. And, I think the Collective Core project you mentioned was me trying to build software, and I kept trying to convince all my friends to build software with me. And no one really wanted to do that. Everyone wanted to just take their job at IBM and, buy a house when they're 25 sort of thing, which, good on them. That's not a terrible life choice either. But what was really exciting about not just working with Justin and Emmett, who are fantastic, but it got me into this like network of people that really love to build software and start companies. And, that company Kiko was actually in the first batch of Y Combinator, which, if you're not familiar, Y Combinator is kind of like one of the most predominant like seed accelerator organizations around. And so, working with them, the Kiko worked out of the Y Combinator office in Boston along with Reddit. And so like the founders of Reddit were in the same room. So Reddit started in the same room as Kiko did with myself and Emmett and Justin, who went on found Twitch. And all of those folks I just mentioned are still really good friends of mine. I actually just officiated Emmett's wedding about a month ago. So it really got me out to California, got me in San Francisco, and got me into this great group of entrepreneurs back in the mid 2000s that I'm still lucky to call friends, and I've learned so much from. I'm very proud to say I'm like one of the least successful people I know, and I think that's they say you're the average of your friends. So, I'm just assuming at some point the law of averages will catch up here. So, I feel very fortunate for them answering that email, frankly.
With those early experiences at Y Combinator, from what I understand, you went through Y Combinator with Fathom in 2021. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What was the difference in the process between then and now? Was it a lot more scrappy at that time, a lot more formalized now? Like, what are the kind of biggest things that come to mind?
Yeah, it feels like I saw the two very different ends of Y Combinator. To be fair, my Kiko experience in the first batch was as an employee, not as a founder. So it's a slightly different lens. But yeah, that was a batch where I think there was like 8 companies in the batch, and no one knew what Y Combinator was. And some folks probably knew who Paul Graham was, but like didn't have, I think, the cachet, obviously, that it has now, where when we went through it in 2021, there were 450 companies. It was fully remote because it was during COVID. It was like 50% international. Like, it's just a very different type of thing, right? It just developed out. But I think the underlying premise is still the same, right? Which is, in some ways I think about like Y Combinator as like a union for startups, where like you join it to kind of collectively bargain with investors so that investors don't treat you poorly. And you do it so that you can exchange kind of tips with your fellow like founders. I mean, part of the reason we did YC for Fathom was, I had the network. I know a lot of folks, fundraising isn't as hard as it used to be for me because I have like a network of folks that, from doing software for 15 years, but it's something so valuable about just being in the arena with other folks and like swapping notes about what's working, right? Especially on things like product and go to market where, things like AI, like we were just talking about this before we started recording, like stuff changes every 2 months, right? And you can't keep on top of everything. But if you kind of keep in touch with other people that are like really smart, good entrepreneurs that are constantly trying to figure out new ways to do, sales and marketing and product and you name it, and they're trying new tools, all this sort of stuff. You just learn a lot that way. Because I always say, like, by the time stuff filters out to being like a blog post or a book, certainly it's probably not working anymore, right? If you read a book on marketing, unless it's like pretty foundational stuff, like those tactics don't work anymore, right? Like that's a very short shelf life. So there's just a ton of value. And also for me, I'm a highly competitive person. So also being around other founders and being like, oh, their thing's going really well. I'm going to work a little harder. I want my thing to go well. So there's a lot of benefits to it. And it was a great experience, even though it was a very different experience. And I think that first one where they were eating dinners together and it was much more communal, right? Like this one was, I did it from the passenger seat of my car, nomading during COVID. So.
Interesting. With that as well, you kind of mentioned in that the kind of rate of change of AI just now, and I want to kind of take your mind back to when you first heard about AI specifically. Do you remember the first time you were hearing about AI, machine learning models, things like that?
Yeah, it was probably about like 10 years ago, actually, right? Like I think the first wave of AI, quote unquote AI, was like kind of mid 20 teens. And, it could in very specific, like narrow use cases, do some cool things generally around like image labeling and stuff like this. But the kind of generalized AI we have now was certainly not there, right? And I think what's kind of funny is like one of the core premises of Fathom, we started Fathom in 2020. And, it's hard to remember, but no one was really talking about AI at that point. In fact, when we put AI in our product name, all my investors kind of like freaked out on me and were like, why don't put AI in your product name? No one likes AI. And it was true, because it's hard to remember this now, but if you go back even just 4 years, there were all these companies in the late 20 teens that labeled themselves as AI. And they just weren't by our modern standards. And they really weren't by kind of those standards then either, right? It was just like, oh, is the system doing anything kind of reasonably intelligent? Oh, it's AI, right? Like it was a marketing gimmick to a certain degree. But I just remember, again, this is kind of the value of being surrounded by smart, more successful people than you. And they're super well connected, and they're keeping their ear to the ground of like what things are coming. And through that network was, felt pretty confident that like really good generalized AI was around the corner. Now, how far around the corner was unclear. And I think actually it came off faster than even most folks I was talking to thought. But yeah, I think, it almost had like I feel like AI had like a lot of things, like a false summit or a head fake where it's like, mid 20 teens, machine learning, AI, da, da, da. And then it kind of fizzled out, came to nothing. And then once everyone kind of gave up on it, it came roaring back with OpenAI and GPT-3 and all these things.
What was the gap between you hearing from kind of investors, friends in the space that like AI was now becoming this thing that could be utilized, to you actually founding Fathom? Like what convinced you to cross that gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of had this hypothesis that like, there's like the key ingredient to what we do, right? So we join your meetings, we record your meetings, we transcribe your meetings, and then we use all that to feed into AI to like write notes for you, right? And then do all the post-meeting work that no one wants to do, right? Fill in your CRM, draft the follow-up email, all this sort of stuff. And, there's two key pieces to that technology tool chain. One is AI, and the other one is transcription. No one wants a transcript. I don't want to have a meeting and then read the transcript, right? But the transcript is like a key piece of data you have to feed to the AI to do anything interesting. And so we kind of had this thesis that like transcription, even 4 years ago, was pretty expensive. We thought it was going to become really, really cheap. And we thought AI is going to get really good. And we also thought if you wait till those two things are true, you'll be like 2 years too late to start the company that will kind of like dominate that space, right? Because there's all these other things you have to do with a product like ours. You have to make it reliably record, which is actually really hard to do across Zoom and Google Meet, Microsoft Teams. These are kind of quirky platforms with undocumented APIs in a lot of ways, right? You need to make it super secure. You need to like make it a good user experience. There's all this kind of like lower level infrastructure stuff. People think about this like, it's just AI. It's like, in a lot of ways, that's actually the easiest part, right? Like that's the part we kind of get for free now. The hard part was building out all the other parts of the product around that. And so we kind of said, okay, we're going to build this thing for 2 years, and then we're going to build out the core infrastructure. It's going to be a really good recording transcription software. That stuff's going to take a long time. And by the time AI shows up, we'll like drop it in as like a new engine in the car, and then it'll really take off. And that's kind of what happened, right? And I think GPT-3 came out, and I think within about like 3 or 4 months, we had our first kind of AI meeting summaries, and they were pretty good. But really, it was like last fall when you got GPT-4, and we actually use Anthropic, but like it was like Claude 2, which is kind of their version of GPT-4, at least on the same level-ish. It got to a point where like, oh no, it's not just like writing a decent summary of the meeting. It's writing better notes on the meeting than the human would, right? And doing it quickly, like we do it, can do it within like 30 seconds of the meeting ending, does it reliably, all these sorts of things. So I feel like that's where we hit the tipping point of now like, AI is like definitely has product market fit for this use case.
When you were in that kind of ideation process, starting this, you obviously talked about transcribing, meeting Notetaker. Why was that the route you decided to go down? Was that out of personal experience? Was that just based on there being a gap in the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the company has worked on, I guess, with the exception of the one for hospital like TV channels, were all problems that I had myself. And so, just before the pandemic, I was working at my previous startup called User Voice, and I was just on a lot of Zoom calls, and I just remember being like, and doing a lot of user research and customer research and stuff like this, and like 15 Zoom calls a day, taking notes, scribbling them down, cleaning them up after the call, looking at them 2 weeks later, not remembering which call it was. Like, the thing we've all experienced with notes, right? Share my notes with a colleague. They're kind of like, they don't get what the big deal is, right? Because everything gets lost in translation. And so, yeah, we had this epiphany in 2020. It's like, gosh, no one likes taking notes and talking at the same time. It kind of like goes against our nature. We're like bad at multitasking as humans. And it's really stressful. And you're always worried you're going to miss something. okay, we can record these meetings. They're all on Zoom. Can't we transcribe them? So there's just like this belief that like, gosh, can't we do a better way, have a better way to do this? And there were some people that are doing this. There's some companies like, if you're familiar with a company like Gong that was doing this specifically for salespeople, but it was a very niche product, specifically for sales folks and really like high end sales folks because it was really expensive. And I talked to a bunch of their users and they all had the same problem I did, right? Like, yeah, there's salespeople and I was a product person, but at the end of the day, it was all notes. And it's just like, we hate taking notes and talking to people, right? It's just stressful. And so I was like, oh, I think there's a unique window of opportunity here, right? Because I knew, with AI coming and transcription getting cheap, like we can be the AI note taker for everyone, not just for high end salespeople, right? And we can make this available to everyone. And really, when you think about it, wouldn't you want that on every meeting? Wouldn't you want like an intern at every meeting that just takes all the notes and writes all the action items and does all the busy work that you have to do after the meeting? And so that was the big thesis, like, oh, there's like a window of opportunity to build this business, and it starts now, and you got to like rush at this window. The window's actually not even open yet because AI hasn't gotten good, but we're running at the window and hoping that it opens up by the time we want to jump through it.
In those original stages of kind of going through that, you've got this user feedback, you've learned that there is a need for this in the market. Who do you then go to trust to then start building that? Are you hiring immediately? Are you finding a few friends, like, let's start developing this by yourself? Are you just developing it alone?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things that are nice about doing your second or third startup. Probably the biggest one, though, is like you have really great people you want to work with. My first startup, User Voice, it was like I was writing code. I would, fall asleep with my laptop, like in bed with me. I'd wake up and start programming again. I look back on that fondly, but that's one way to do it. But for Fathom, we started with 4 really senior engineers that I worked with before on day one and, raised money on day one. And again, it's because we thought speed of execution was so important. We're like, this is not a completely non-obvious idea, right? Like there's going to be other people that are going to pick up on like, oh, this is definitely the future. So we need to like move really, really quickly towards it. There's a lot of ideas. Y Combinator talks about these like unfavorably unpopular ideas, like no one believed would work. Like, they love to trot out the like Airbnb example, right? No one was competing with Airbnb until Airbnb was a success, right? No one was looking at that space and be like, oh, they didn't have to fight. Like, so they could kind of go low and slow for a while and really just perfect the product. We didn't have that, right? We had the opposite of that, where it's like everyone looked at our space and was like, this thing is, obvious, and like, 10 people are going to build this next year, so you should you should move quickly. So,
got you. If that's when you're starting this, you've got these kind of senior engineers. What are the core principles that you're working on? You've got that fast iteration. You've got do something different, unique. Is there anything else that you were like, we always resort back to this as a core principle? This always drives us.
I think we are very. I like to do things in stages. So I think a lot of startups sometimes try to do all the things at once. Like we're trying to launch, we're trying to get new users, we're trying to retain those users, we're trying to monetize those users, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, it was like, let's take this one step at a time. Let's just first build a product that's reliable and reliable enough that you can keep using it, right? That was like really hard at first. And then the second step is let's just focus on retention. Like we don't need 1,000 users. We just need 50 people that use this day in, day out. And that's why reliability is important, right? And that's what we had, right? I think it took us about a year to get to like 50 users that used us day in, day out.
Really?
Yeah. We hadn't launched yet. So we were just kind of like bringing people into our private beta and like bringing a cohort of people. We'd onboard them by hand sort of thing because our onboarding was terrible. Because again, we didn't care about onboarding. I didn't care about monetization. I didn't care about all those things. All I cared about is like, can we build a free product that people love enough that they'll use it day in, day out? Because that's actually a really hard thing. It's like getting people to change their behavior and use a product that frequently is not easy. But if we can, like, that is the key thing. I always feel like, like any startup, you want to first focus on retention or like ongoing engagement, right? You can get someone into your product every day. You'll eventually be able to find a way to make revenue off them, or maybe not off those first users, the next 1,000 users sort of thing. So first focus on that. And, we always knew that we'd monetize with like teams and managers, but we also knew like, hey, we don't care about that now. Like we knew kind of the order in which we wanted to tackle this business. We had a sense of the shape of what the business would look like when it grew up 3-4 years in, kind of where we are now, where you'd have a free product, you'd have a kind of a team workspace that you sell to managers, you'd have all these viral loops, da da da. But in the beginning, we're like, okay, you can't build all these things in parallel, right? So like, let's just build all the stuff that helps free user retention. Great, we got that. Now we're launching on the Zoom marketplace. We're getting a bunch of signups, but like the onboarding process is very good. Great. Let's spend like 6 months just making the onboarding process really, really good. Oh, okay. Onboarding process is really good. Now let's spend 6 months just really working on like the referral process and how does it spread, within an organization or from team to team. Oh crap, it's 2022. The market shifted. No one cares about growth. Everyone cares about revenue. Okay, let's now focus on like how do we monetize this by selling this to the managers of teams and stuff like that. And so like I think having that, knowing like here's the whole house we're building, but not trying to build the second floor, the first floor, whatever at the same time, but like knowing the order in which we're trying to tackle this by going after the highest risk things first, which, and the lowest risk things last. I think it was super helpful amount of focus, because even with 5 engineers, there's still just a lot to do, right? And so you really got to figure out how to get really, really focused and narrow in on what matters first.
Regarding what matters, I'm wondering how you came up with the name Fathom, how you came up with the branding of the blue and the black, and whether that was that important when you first began, or it was just like, let's slap a name on it and some colors and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I need to come up with a better origin story for the name. I should workshop this, because it's a great name. It fits, right? Fathom is like to understand, and like basically, that's, what we help you do is understand what happened in these meetings you're on or not on, right? If you're an IC or a manager. But honestly, the way we found the name is we just did this, like, let's take I think it was 6 and 7 letter English, like adjective and verb, and cross-reference it with the TLDs that make sense for us, right? Which were like, and then we ended up like, oh, .video would work. It's not very well used. And like, here's 6 names in .video that are pretty interesting. One of them was Fathom. I was like, oh, that's a cool name. And then honestly, we're just like, oh, let's just use that. And then, yeah, the black and the color scheme, it's just kind of like my favorite colors. I also thought like, I kind of think we were trying to build we wanted Fathom to be perceived as being kind of like a premium product that we then kind of gave away for free, right? I think sometimes you have free products and they kind of look like free products, right? They're kind of like overly selly and kind of tacky, right? And so we're like, how do we make something that looks like a premium brand, but then we give it away for free? And also that was our mindset internally. Like we want, even though we're giving away this thing for free, we want to act as if everyone's paying us $10,000 for this thing, right? We want to give you, I always told our teams, like, we want to give 5-figure level support, customer support for a free product. And so we wanted to make it feel like it was this kind of like really cool kids club that like you're on the leading edge with this. And so everything is all black and, you have black on black hat and stuff like this. Right. So, yeah, I mean, that was kind of the brand theory. Right. And I think it's, people still ask us like, will you do a light mode in the app? And we're like, maybe one day. I'm like,
Has that managed to stay true and kind of separate you from competitors as the space in general, like Fireflies, Otter and stuff have entered the space? Do you reckon that branding has really separated you in terms of the premium nature in comparison to them?
Probably not. I mean, probably what separated us is like, go look at our G2 reviews and, we have a perfect 5.0 and they have a lot of, people frustrated with the reliability of those products. So I think I think at the end of the day in this market, it's like features and functionality still matter more in this phase of the market. I do think at some point you get to, it gets large enough and then the brand stuff kind of matters because people want to pick a brand that other people are picking that seems like the choice people like you, you kind of want to, I want to do the same things people like me are choosing, sort of thing, right? There's like safety in that and community in that. But no, I think, I don't know. It's hard to judge how much, like, this is every marketer, I think, probably is cringing right now. It's like, it's really hard to judge the value of brand, right? Especially in the early stage. But I think we generally differentiate on the fact that we have more accurate summaries. We have a far more generous free version. I think we forced the market to have free versions. Now everyone's got like some free version, but in the beginning, no one did except for us. And then they all saw us running away at the market because we had this like really killer product that was also free. And now they're all like, oh, we've got some free option with a bunch of asterisks around like how, free for the first 5 minutes of your call or something like that. I don't know. They're probably more generous than that, but we win a lot because, number one app on HubSpot, number one app on Zoom, AI Notetaker on HubSpot, number one rated on G2. I think it's that stuff more than our brand.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've actually heard recently. We do live events on our premium community. Yesterday, I spoke with Grant Hushek, the first kind of employee over at Hampton, automation expert, and he uses Fathom and kind of touts the benefits of it because of the level of integrations and the different triggers that you can use in Zapier, Make, so on, so on, so on. So it's a lot more granular in terms of the service that you have in that in comparison to the other ones.
Yeah, I think so. And this is also the benefit of like, that focus, right? We're not, we got there pretty early. We focused a lot on that individual user experience, really focused a lot on entrepreneurs and founders and stuff like that. So founders and sales folks like are kind of our two big audiences. And we just, those folks love to have power tools and love to be able to like build workflows and like, monkey around with things. And we absolutely love when people do that. So we try to build a lot of power user features in.
Right now, you've got a pretty advanced version of the product, and I'm wondering what the kind of North Star of the company, where do you see Fathom in 3 years, and how does that maybe tie in with the larger macro development of AI in general?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two things I'm pretty excited about, right? Like for folks in the meeting, I think we're moving towards this North Star. Like, how do we get to a world where just talking about something speaks it into existence, right? So we already have a lot of these things, right? You and I could be on a meeting and I mentioned a task for you to do and Fathom picks that up, right? And you can have that automatically sent to your CRM and pretty soon to other systems and whatnot. But you can imagine a world where we take that even further. And it's like, like we're talking about a discussion and, we need to get that email out to so-and-so. We need to get this like presentation built for so-and-so. And all of a sudden it's spinning up AIs in the background that do all that stuff. So it almost just feels like, feels like the future if you're like in Star Trek and you're just telling the computer, hey, computer, do this and do that, right? So I'm pretty excited about that. Also pretty excited about a world where, you can actually be in less meetings because, I think there's always this like meeting inflation that happens where it's like, we have this recurring meeting internally. One time Tim needed to hear something about the meeting. Now Tim is permanently attached to this recurring meeting, even though Tim doesn't care about 99% of the content in here, right? And it's this tyranny because like these things are all synchronous. It's like, you can't, if you weren't in the meeting when that thing was discussed, it's lost forever. Well, that's not true anymore, right? Like what's the really cool thing about this technology is like we're kind of making meetings asynchronous, right? Where it's like, there's a lot of times I'm, talking to someone we're trying to hire and I watched the recording of them talking to our head of talent, right, a week earlier. And I'm like, I saw you talk to Lumen and you're asking about this. And just, it's like, it was like I was in the room for it. Right. And so I think we're getting this world where one, you can just speak things into existence and it happens and you don't have to do all this busy work after meetings. And then two, we'll get to this world where like, we only need to have 3 people in this meeting, but hey, the AI, or we said, hey, Tim should really know about this part of the chat. Great. AI at Fathom will just immediately send Tim the 5-minute clip of that. And, other people can audit these meetings for, I'm running the engineering team and I want to know anytime there's like a heated architectural debate that goes on for a while, right? AI just sends you the clip, right? And so we end up in this world where I don't have to go to a bunch of meetings. The AI is constantly just sending around, here's the 5-minute highlight reel for you about stuff you might care about, right? And I think that's a really exciting world where we can get back to more doing and less like sitting in meetings waiting for stuff that's relevant to us. So,
And that future, what does Fathom become? Because at that point, it's not the number one AI note taker, it's something entirely different. So,
I mean, it becomes basically a platform for your meetings, right? Like the AI kind of layer for your meetings that's kind of doing that work to get the content of the meeting or getting the outcomes of the meeting off into the other systems that you work in. And so kind of an orchestration layer and very much a platform that you build these kind of AI automations on top of, much like, you're mentioning folks do today with like Zapier and stuff like that. So just making that stuff much more accessible, I think is pretty exciting.
and with regards to that, I want to maybe jump into specifics. Is there anything you can reveal in terms of the roadmap, in terms of features you're rolling out, partnerships, like anything specific you can kind of point your finger to, like look out for this in the foreseeable future?
Yeah. So, I mentioned kind of last year, like it was really December of last year. So about a year ago is when we kind of put out our GPT-4 level meeting notes and AI action items and stuff like that. And that was the point where I think we really crossed the threshold of now it's like, no, like this thing can take better notes than you do. the advances in AI this year have been really exciting in that, like, all the stuff I was just describing, one of the big challenges has been the AI can only ingest so much content, right? So you can give it one meeting, give me really notes, but what if I want to know about what happened over the 6 meetings in this deal, or the 10 meetings in this research project, or all 200 meetings we had this month with customers or prospects. And now we're getting to the point where the AI can do that well. That's also the key thing with AI, right? Like, it's easy to get to spit out something. I think maybe this speaks back to the premium brand, is I always hold our team to, like, we don't just want to launch an AI feature because it kind of works. We want to be seen as the brand. Like, if Fathom launches an AI feature, it's because they've done a lot of testing on it and they're really confident in the output of it, which I think is like the new thing you have to do in AI. It's really hard. It's why all these big companies, I think, really struggle with their AI features, because they don't have the cultural discipline to be like, hey, output this 300 times and make sure it works well, right? Like, it's like, oh, it spits out something great, like checks the box, right? It's really tough to QA. So yes, we're at a point now where you can now do things with a much larger set of meetings, like, do some interesting AI analyses and pull out insights and key clips and whatnot that you couldn't do 6 to 9 months ago. And so I think that opens up a lot of these opportunities like I'm describing for, especially for folks running a team, to be able to go in and say, hey, I want to, anytime there's a competitor mentioned positively, I want to know about it. Anytime there's there was pushback in a sales call, right, that our team didn't have a good answer for, like, I want to know about it. There's a new product feedback request that's been coming up a lot. I want to know about it. Like, you get this really fun world where this AI is just your own, not only the assistant in your meeting, but it's your assistant joining every meeting in the org, right? And so you can imagine this world where it's like every meeting there's 10 interns in the meeting, because like each, for 10 people in the org that are like auditing that meeting, trying to see if there's anything that they need to be aware of. So I think that's really cool. We're going to get to this place pretty soon where the AI can just tell you so much about what's happening in these meetings. You'll really be able to sleep better at night. I think when you talk to a lot of managers and founders, there's always this fear that, like, there's stuff being said in my sales calls that I should be aware of. There's stuff being said in my customer success calls I should be aware of. There's discussions happening internally I should be aware of, right? Or, especially in remote teams like ours. So pretty excited about what we can do with all of that.
Something you touched on there is the idea of cultural readiness. And I really wanted to kind of learn from you, in terms of running a company, how do you ensure that, I mean, something you mentioned in there is that if Fathom's going to put out an AI product or service, right, it's going to be this high quality thing. Everyone's going to respect that. You also move at this rapid pace of innovation and iterate a lot. So how do you kind of maintain that, like, cultural approach internally? And is that different in terms of running an AI company to being part of user voice?
Certainly the way you build AI companies, I think, is different. For the last 15 years, if you're building a SaaS company, your roadmap is really defined by your belief in what is the highest ROI thing to do, right? Like, it's like your roadmap in SaaS is like, okay, what's the impact of this and what's the effort to build this, right? Oh, okay, we're trying to roughly prioritize by that, right? But there's no real technical challenges usually, right? Most SaaS companies are like there are some technical challenges here and there, but like nothing major. The AI company flips it on its head. It's kind of like, oh, we have a roadmap of like 10 to 15 different jobs to be done or use cases we'd love to support. And, we could maybe bully the AI into doing it, but really we're trying to find what, okay, this new AI came out. Did any of these 10 jobs we've been wanting to do, does this AI unlock one of them or do them really well? And so you kind of work backwards from technical capability to roadmap in a way you didn't before. And so, my team, we have an AI team, and I describe what I call, like, we have a Jenga method for kind of R&D here, right? You've played Jenga before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, right? And so, like, when you play Jenga, when you push on a block, if you play the version that's not hardcore, you can kind of test the block before you push it, right? If you push on a block and it comes out easily, you keep going. But if you push on a block and you get resistance, stop and find another block. And that's how we kind of think about it. In this case, the blocks are use cases and models, right? So let's say we want to, we want the AI to find action items in your meetings. Oh, GPT-3, we pushed on it. It's really hard. Like, it doesn't give us very good results. Rather than try to bully GPT-3 into giving us mediocre results for AI action items. We're just going to try something else. Chronological summary of the meeting. GPT-3 can do decently like that. Okay, great. Let's pull that block out. GPT-4 comes out. Great. Let's push on the block. Oh, now that AI action item block comes out really easily. Great. Now is the time to do that. So it's kind of this fun thing where you're like R&D driven. Like you still have to know, like, here's the top tasks that our user would love the AI to do for them. But then you're constantly just evaluating, right? Like where is the intersection of what AI can do today and those use cases? Because a lot of times, you can work really hard and be like, oh, I got GPT-3 to do this task that's all over its head. We use some fine-tuned models. We do all this stuff. And then if you just waited 6 months, you worked on that for 6 months, and then you launch it, and a new GPT comes out, and it just does it out of the box, and your 6 months worth of work were kind of negligible, right? So, I think that's the game we're constantly playing. Is like, let's find where the Venn diagram overlaps for use case and model fit.
Based on that approach of the Jenga block approach, what do you prioritize for hiring? Are you looking for innately curious people? Are the people you're hiring different from what you'd hire in a traditional SaaS company?
Yeah, so we actually have two sides. So we have one side that looks a lot like a traditional SaaS company, right? Pretty senior engineers, platform engineers, full stack engineers. But then we have this other team where, how many years of experience can you have doing AI things? Right? You can't really have more than it's 2, maybe tops, sort of thing, right? And so I think it's a really interesting opportunity that we tend to hire folks much earlier in their career who are just super passionate about AI, and they've usually been, hacking on this stuff on the side, or reading white papers, or maybe they've got an advanced degree in machine learning or something like that, right? And they wouldn't be able to they don't have the domain experience to go join our core engineering team, but why would they want to? Like, this stuff is the new engineering sort of thing. And so, yeah, it's kind of exciting. It's a different profile of folks who look for there.
I want to take things more personal to you for a second. You've obviously got a lot of experience kind of founding and running companies. What do you think you get right as a CEO just now? And if you do falter, where do you falter, and how do you compensate for that?
Oh gosh. I'll give 2 answers to this. One is like doing your second or third, whatever startup is actually really, really fun, because it's kind of like speed running an old video game. And so I always like to use this analogy to Minecraft, where first time you do a startup is going to feel like the first time you played Minecraft. And if you've ever played Minecraft, you kind of just get dropped in this open world. There's no like, how do you win? There's no like, how does this even work? It's all you learn by doing, right? And it's like, I don't know, the first time I played, I wandered around for a while. It took me half an hour. I think I had to Google like, oh, you got to punch a tree to get some wood. And then you get wood, you can then make a torch, and it kind of goes on from there. And that's like the first time you do your startup. You're like, I think I roughly know what to do. I kind of want to build a house, but I think the second time you do a startup is like when you've played that game for 10,000 hours or watched it on YouTube or something, right? And you immediately know what to do. And before the first sun goes down, you've built a castle and a moat and all these sorts of things. And so I think that the big advantage you have as a second-time entrepreneur is like things that used to feel like essay questions now feel like multiple choice questions. And so I think, when you think about like, oh, what's our go-to-market strategy? If you asked me that 15 years ago, I'd be like, oh, I don't know. Just, I'm inventing things from whole cloth here. You asked me that for Fathom. I was like, well, there's really only 8 channels that matter. 4 of them don't make sense for what we're doing. And we don't really want to do content. It takes too long. Okay, we're doing basically, and we think we can do word of mouth. Oh, and we're doing marketplaces. Okay, we're doing word of mouth marketplaces, right? And so your speed of execution goes so much faster. So in terms of like, I think your question is like, so that makes you just like time to market makes you, I think, a lot better of an entrepreneur. I think your question is like, what do I still want to be better at?
Where do you falter, and how do you compensate for that?
I think probably the thing I struggle with the most is, I think what a lot of folks that are kind of perfectionist builder types do, which is what's the right balance of doing versus delegating. I think in my first company, I delegated a lot of the things that were core. Like, I'm a product and design guy, and I delegated a lot of those product design things probably a little too early. Like, we hadn't quite achieved the vision, and I was already kind of delegating off to other folks, and they didn't have the full view. And so this time I'm trying to be more thoughtful around be real intentional. Like, what things should I delegate first, and what things should I stay engaged on? And so there's a lot of little projects always. Yeah, I always call myself the chief everything else officer. There's always like a bunch of little stuff in the org that needs fixing. Oh, this process is broken, or we need to fix this. People are pushing back on this terms of service thing. Like, there's a lot of little stuff, right? And if you're someone who's like me and you love kind of fixing all these little things, so you spend your time running around fixing all these little things. I love to check the box. I really love this tool called Strengths Finders. It's like a personality test of sorts, but it just tells you, here's your top 5 strengths, which is a personal like management principle of mine, which is manage people to their strengths, not try to build up their weaknesses. And mine is, I'm highly competitive and I love to achieve things, which means I love to cross things off my to-do list. The downside of that is I will love to cross off all the little shit that doesn't matter. And so now I've been building out a team of folks that look like me. They're often ex-founders themselves, high ownership. They love to fix little things. They love to cross things off the list. And I delegate all the little but important things to them so that I can focus on like the bigger projects. And I think that's something I've had to learn to do, because otherwise I just will spend all day checking boxes and not being like, oh yeah, but we also need to figure out this big thing, right? So that's my personal kind of hack for that.
With that in mind, just something that comes to mind, I'm just curious about your kind of second or third time doing a startup. What does your day-to-day life look like actually running a company? Like, how do you kind of block out that time? Is that pre-organized? I'd spend 30% on product and 20% on operations and so on. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's not that structured. Sometimes I wish it was. And it's one of those things, honestly, I kind of redesign it every 6 to 9 months, where I look at my calendar, my standing meetings, and say, which of these still need to exist, and are they serving me, and are they serving other people in these meetings, sort of thing. Earlier in the company, so we're 45 people now. We started this year, we were about 12 people.
Wow.
And when we were at 12 people, there was more, I was doing more doing, right? And I think there's always like Paul Graham talks about like the maker manager schedule, and like you kind of have like a plan for your mornings to be kind of interrupted. And then that's your manager period, right? Where you're just highly available. And then you plan for your afternoons to be when you get stuff done. And I generally ascribe to that. And also I'm in San Francisco, and a lot of my team was East Coast. So the first couple of years that worked really well. I would just wake up and plan to spend the first couple mornings in meetings or being distracted. Just my only job was just to make sure everyone else was fully enabled. They had all the context they needed to keep going. And then in the evenings or afternoons is when I'd sit down and be like, okay, I'm going to write that spec. I'm going to design that page. I'm going to, draft that email, that sort of thing, or that newsletter. And that worked out really well. I also did things like block out Tuesdays and Thursdays for no meetings. So you can do it that way of like, okay, these are my making days. But I think Paul Graham's way of like mornings for management and afternoons for making worked out really well. Now that we're 45 folks, it's shifted. I don't do as much making anymore. So it's much more just managing. So I would say it goes from like all day is managing, and then sometimes in the evening is like some time for making, or a weekend sort of thing. But yeah, I think that I know some other folks do stuff where they have like theme days where we're doing all the product stuff on this day. And I just find that challenging at a small scale, because you never know when someone on the team is going to need something. And so I just try to have a really, really low SLA. Like my commitment to my team is, I'm not always working, but I'll always be available to you. And I'll always get you an answer, because I will always get you an answer as quickly as possible, like under an hour, and ideally under like 10 minutes. Because I think that's my SLA to my team, right? And I think that's super important, so people never feel like they're going to get blocked.
You're obviously at an inflection point, moving from 12 to 45 employees in the space of a year. A lot of things are changing. Your management style is changing. How your day's broken up. I think my kind of meta question to ask you is like, why do you do what you do, and why do you keep building?
I'd say so we have this internal channel called Boom, and it's where we post kind of screenshots of people sending in emails or writing LinkedIn posts or whatnot, where they talk about how much they love using Fathom. That's why I do it. That is like super gratifying to do. And, everyone likes to think, oh yeah, you love watching the revenue numbers go up and usage numbers go up and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's just like, I don't know, I get a lot of personal joy, soul filling kind of, joy validation from just seeing like, oh, we're building something that like changes people's lives in some small way. Right. And that's kind of cliche, right? Everyone's like, oh, we're trying to change the world, but it does, we get these messages. People are like, oh, my workday is so much less stressful because now I'm not worried about, oh, I had 8 back-to-back meetings. I didn't remember half of them by the end of the day, but thankfully I had Fathom. And it's just like, I don't know, it's just a good feeling as someone who just like likes to build stuff and leave the world a little better than I found it. Uh, that's why I do it. And it's like, honestly, I feel like I'm playing the world's best video game because every day I get to go up, I get to log into my Minecraft server with all my other colleagues, and we're tweaking the castle we built called Fathom, right? And like every day we try to make it a little bit better. And it's just a fun way to live and work.
And what does the future look like for you as obviously founder and CEO of the company? Like, is there any point in which you decide I'm going to leave the company or sell the company, or is it just as long as it's still fun, keep growing with it, keep building it into something better?
I mentioned earlier that like I'm the least successful of my friends, right? I've got a couple friends who have run publicly traded companies, had really big exits, all these sorts of things. And the only thing that I can tell that maybe makes like when the journey becomes a little less fun is like when the company gets really big. There's some theory that like above the Dunbar number, like, 150 folks, that's when politics creep in because everyone can't know everyone in the company anymore. And, I think everyone, if you ask anyone who's running a company of like 500 more people and, tell them you're running a startup and they'll ask you, oh, how big is your company? You tell them 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, they'll be like, you'll just see this kind of like, oh, they're like, that's such a good period. It's like when your parents are talking to you in college, like, oh, best time of your life sort of thing. Right. And so, I've never experienced that. User Voice got to about 50 employees. So we're kind of at the upper bound of what I've seen. But I've talked to enough folks to realize that like it gets really hard to manage more and more humans as the team gets bigger. So I'm really excited about this concept that I've been thinking about too. Like, I think with AI, you'll be able to have the first like $100 million companies that in revenue that maybe have 100 employees, right? Sam Altman, actually, they talk internally about like, what's the first $1 billion revenue company that's going to be one employee. I think that's kind of insane, but like possible probably. But I think like, there's a possibility now. I think that's generally where founder CEOs tend to run out of runway is when it moves from we're shipping product and delighting customers to we spend a lot of our time just keeping this human organism called the corporate structure in place and functioning healthily. It's a completely different job. It feels like, right, based on what everyone's told us. So, I'm really excited. I'm having a great time right now, really enjoying it. And just thinking about how do we keep this organization lean and use AI so that we can keep it this like fun, small community of folks that are like building on stuff together and not have it drift into what so often happens is it becomes a big company and then it loses its soul a little bit. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that. I've kind of heard it a few times recently. The one kind of example that comes to mind was Peter Levels, so Levels.io on Lex Friedman's podcast. A couple of weeks ago, he makes $37 million a year. I think like 90% of that's profit. And he just builds like indie little AI SaaS apps. Like Photo AI was his biggest one that went big on Twitter. And he just refuses to sell them or just expand them to bigger companies because he's got AI to help him on the back end. He's like, it's way more fun. I don't need to deal with any politics, no bureaucratic nonsense. I'm just having fun building cool stuff that people like. So it's interesting. Have you seen a shift in the attitude of Silicon Valley, San Francisco, like the entrepreneurship space in general, in terms of how people approach this, right? Because I'm not involved in the space, but from what you've said, I can conceive of 20 years ago, the goal was to build the biggest company possible and sell it for the largest exit. Whereas you've just described a lot more kind of fine-tuned approach. It's like, okay, I want to build a good-sized company that makes me happy and never loses that spirit.
I mean, let's be clear. I want to build a massive company from a usage revenue perspective. I just don't want headcount I don't want headcount to scale linearly with usage and revenue, right?
Got you.
I don't know what the zeitgeist is here on this. I think one difference also for me in my 20s is like I'm not out there building community as much as I used to. I feel like I've got my entrepreneurship community. So I have a certain voice that I hear, but they're more late stage founders, people running publicly traded companies. I'd like to think, though, that the myth of headcount being the vanity metric we all judge each other by is hopefully going away, right? Like, I do think there's always this where like, oh, they, like it's almost because I think it's because people, aren't generally public about usage or revenue. The one number everyone can use as a proxy of success is headcount. Oh, how's your company doing? Oh, how many people are on your team? It's like it's a socially acceptable way to ask how well are you doing, right? But it's not the right metric, and it then ingrains this idea that like success is headcount, right, sort of thing. But I think AI is like kind of disintermediating that concept. I also just think there's just big backlash in general on like a lot of layers of middle management. I think there was, and another kind of problematic thing was like the only way you could move up in your career historically was like to go into management, right? You could be a great engineer at some point. It feels like, oh, but the only way to progress my career is become a manager, which has always been so tragic to me because like they're different skill sets, right? It's kind of, again, like the founder that's a great product builder versus the founder that's a good company builder at 500,000 people. Now that's starting to go away. And I think part of it is things like AI. We've got better communication tools. We don't need like middle management is communication nodes in the organization. They help orchestrate things and whatnot. If you only had 100 employees, you wouldn't need that many middle managers, especially if you've got these AI tools that are summarizing meetings for you. Like, I think about what we're doing is rebuilding a modern version of that like communication network that's not humans passing notes and emails between each other, right? That the middle management layer did. So I think, and I think certain things like Elon shakeup of Twitter, like, I disagree with a lot of how that was done from a change management perspective, but I think it is emblematic of this belief in Silicon Valley that, oh, like maybe we did overhire middle management, or like we can build better communication processes such that we don't need, 40% of our headcount in management, sort of thing. So yeah, it's a long-winded way to say I don't know, but I sure hope that people out there aren't measuring themselves by headcount, because I think it's orthogonal to actual success.
I love that as a piece of advice. And I think to kind of round off the podcast, I'd like to ask one last question. If you were to speak to 18-year-old or 25-year-old Richard White, and you were to give him kind of one piece of advice for the rest of his life, career, work-life balance, whatever, what would you say?
Trust yourself more. I think most of the folks I saw that were really successful in their 20s had this like almost hubris around just trusting their own gut and coming up with their own solutions from first principles. Whereas I was like, I think overly deferential to people that I perceived to be experts. And it's slowed down my decision making, because every time I need to make some big decision about go to market, instead of just being like, I'm going to figure this out from first principles on my own, which you can do pretty quickly, I want to go consult 3 people that are 10 years older than me and see what they think. The other problem with that is that like their experience is grounded in the last 10 years. And I just said earlier that like stuff that happened even 2 years ago is probably not relevant anymore, right? The world changes. And so there's kind of a reason why a lot of consumer products tend to be built by people in their teens and 20s and not by people in their 40s and 50s. It's because you have to just start from scratch and not be kind of tainted by what did or did not work 10 years ago, because it's irrelevant, right? So yeah, I think the biggest advice I give myself is like, trust your gut, trust yourself. What would your answer be to this? And get comfortable with that, and don't feel like you've got to ask around because you don't trust yourself, sort of thing.
All right, I love it. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on today. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone that's listened to this has learned a lot as well. So just thank you again, and I can't wait to see what you build with Fathom.
Thank you, Liam. It's been great.